Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chip Rolley, Artistic Director of Sydney Writers Festival, and this man next to me is Rick Gekoski, who is, well, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Rick in a minute, but I've got some details that we need to discuss before the usual stuff and palaver that we go on about, first of which is, please reach in your pockets and your handbags and pull out your mobile phones, whether you think you've turned them off or not. Just look at them. I just did it 2 seconds ago, and I'm going to do it right now. Let's
now
both do it.
Now I'm nervous.
That's right. We're very strict about this here, and if one of us ends up ringing in the middle of this session, we'll be very embarrassed. So good, we've done that. Now, second of which is if any of you need to leave for any reason whatsoever, you should go get your head examined first. But second of all, please place yourself, please sit near the exits and try to make as little disturbance as possible to your fellow audience members. There will be a short time, and I'll tell you in a minute why it needs to be short, a short time at the end for audience questions and answers about this interesting session. And Rick will be available to sign books. Rick, as well as being the chair of judges for the Man Booker International Prize, and a previous chair of the Booker Prize. He is also, of course, an author and a past guest of Sydney Writers Festival. We had Rick with us last year, and we're delighted to have him again, particularly on this occasion of the announcement just yesterday of the winner of the 4th Man Booker International Prize. And if you haven't heard yet, the winner is Philip Roth. We also have today a bit of controversy, and I have to say, as a festival director, I love nothing more than a bit of controversy to get tongues wagging. So we're going to hit that one head on. So the winner is Philip Roth. The judges were Rick, was the chair of judges, Justin Cartwright was a judge, and Carmen Khalil was a judge. And no sooner was the announcement made that Philip Roth was the winner then one of your judges went rogue.
That would be right.
That would be right. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah.
Overnight, to the Guardian newspaper, Carmen Khalil has completely disassociated herself from the prize and objects to the decision made by the judges. Clearly, there wasn't agreement in the judging room, and we're going to talk about how the process went. But first of all, I just want to read you a little bit of what Carmen said. It was quite a shock to get this email this morning. She said that about Philip Roth, he goes on and on and on about the same subject in almost every single book. It's as though he's sitting on your face and you can't breathe.
I have no comment on that at all. I'd be interested in yours.
Well, it seems like we're back in Portnoy territory, which I guess is a tribute of sorts
I mean, the whole thing
to the winner.
The whole thing begins to strike you that all of a sudden you've got trapped in a Philip Roth novel. Yeah. And it has this kind of odd inevitability about it. It's surprising.
We're not going to spend too much time on this, but just a little bit more, because
Yeah.
this event is about the winner, Philip Roth. But we do need to talk about this, because it is a prelude, as I said, into talking about the process.
Yeah.
She says, I don't rate him as a writer at all. I made it clear that I wouldn't have put him on the long list, so I was amazed when he stayed there. He was the only one I didn't admire. All the others were fine. Roth goes to the core of there, and there is, by which she means Gekoski, Rick Gekoski, and Justin Cartwright, the other judge, to the core of their beings. But he certainly doesn't go to the core of mine. Emperor's Clothes. In 20 years' time, will anyone read him? So I put it to you, in 20 years' time, will anyone read Philip Roth?
Yeah.
Yeah?
That's an easy one.
That's an easy one.
I'm modestly surprised she didn't say 100, where there would be a point. And I do think we ask ourselves, it's one of the things you ask when you're judging a prize, is there something enduring about this writer's work so that in 2 or 3 generations it will still speak to people the way Dickens still speaks to us? 20 years' time, that seems uninteresting to me to say. It's not provocative enough. On the other hand, it's going out on a limb, and there we are. I think the fact is that these are embattled things, literary prizes. This particular prize, like the Booker Prize generally, I'll bet you it's true of the Miles Franklin as well, people argue and argue and argue. They read their guts out. They care a lot. Passions are aroused. That's what happens. Are there unanimous decisions in literary prizes? Almost never. And then the question is, for a chair, what are you going to do about it, right? How are you going to cope with the fact that you have intractable disagreements? Different chairs, I think, take different views of this. My view was, you go with the passionate approval of at least a majority of the judges rather than a compromise.
So you go with, okay, so you would go for a vote, in other words.
Well,
a vote rather than a consensus model? What are the
there's
choices of a chair?
We just had a big referendum in England between first past the post voting and AV voting, which is alternative vote. So you say first choice, second choice, third choice. Now the problem with AV as a model is that you could get somebody winning who nobody actually supported as their first choice. To my mind, that's intolerable. It's not what a body of judges in this kind of thing does. And therefore, sometimes you won't have a consensus. And that seems to me fine. The prize doesn't exist to satisfy the judges. The prize exists to try to find and to reward and to recognize and to honor a great writer. And if 2 out of the 3 of you feel that passionately, then the third has to defer, in my view. It's what I would have done if I'd been the third person. And it's what generally happens. Now, sometimes that third person is very distressed, and rightly, because you work. Carmen Khalil's wonderful to read together with. She's a great reader. She reads enormously widely. She discovered people we didn't know. I learned an enormous amount working with her. I wouldn't have had any other colleague in that respect. And she's very, very disappointed. And she's cross. And I get that. I get that.
Very disappointed. So we'll talk a little bit about the prize. Let's back up a little bit and talk about what the Man Booker International Prize is.
Okay.
And what is the difference between the Man Booker International Prize and the Man Booker Prize? Because, of course, at this festival, we also have the winner of the 2010 Man Booker Prize, Howard Jacobson, with us, speaking tonight with you, in fact.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, City Recital Hall. Don't miss it. And so what is the difference? What the Man Booker Prize that Howard won is for the book.
The Man Booker Prize is for a single book and published in a single year by any Commonwealth writer. They're submitted by the publishers. You might get, I did it in 2005, we probably had 110 novels. The Man Booker International Prize, which began actually curiously in the same year, 2005, there are no submissions. It's for a writer's lifetime work, and it can be any writer who either writes in English or is widely available in English translation. Any fiction writer from around the world, they also have to be alive. That's very helpful. Which is to say, any good fiction writer in the world is eligible for this prize. Their names aren't submitted. There are no procedures given to you as a judge. One of the things about working for Man Booker as a judge that's wonderful is they simply trust you. So what does the rubric say? How are we supposed to decide? The rubric says that the prize awards an achievement in fiction.
So you're not...
Well, if you know what that means, you could tell me.
I don't know what that means. It can mean anything.
It means what we want it to mean, and that, I think, is why it's there. It's to enable the judges to spread their net as widely and as freely and as liberally as they wish.
So you've made a point of the fact that it's about literary achievement.
Yeah.
It's not about the best, necessarily?
Well, my view,
and what is the difference?
My view is that there are different kinds of reasons you would honor somebody. So if you look at the list we came up with, there is Philip Pullman on it. Philip Pullman is an absolutely wonderful writer with regard to the Northern Lights trilogy, which I think is one of the great things written, read by both children and adults. It's not children's literature, since Gulliver's Travels. And you could easily say as a committee, I wish to honor him for that achievement. On the other hand, you could say about Philip Roth, for 51 years he's written books of masterpiece level. I wish to honor him for that achievement. Do I at the same time want to say Philip Roth is a better writer? I'm not interested. That seems to me a boring thing to say. Let's suppose that the prize is first given in the year 1923. And Chip and I are the judges. And who's eligible for the prize? Well, there's that young Mr. James Joyce who just published Ulysses. And he also published Dubliners and Portrait of the Artist, a Young Man. Really smart guy. What about him? And you say, well, wait a minute, Marcel Proust has just finished that 12-volume thing, À la recherche de temps perdu. What about him? He's better than Joyce. Well, I don't know what that means. So then I say, hold on, there's Thomas Hardy. He hasn't written a novel for a long time, but my God, he was good. Let's honor him.
He was writing poetry at that point.
And absolutely. And then you say, well, wait a minute, if we could honor Thomas Hardy, we could honor Joseph Conrad. Between 1897 and 1907, he doesn't write anything except masterpieces. It's absolutely astonishing. Now, if you then found yourself, there are different reasons you could honor each of them. But if you found yourself vacuously discussing whether Joseph Conrad was a better writer than James Joyce and whether they were better than Marcel Proust, I think you would lose yourself in inanities and things that you couldn't actually work with.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on this, because wouldn't you inevitably, and I can only imagine, given the outcome, there were a lot of disagreements, clearly, in this judging panel, as there are, as you say, in most. Clearly, you're going to be saying, come on, this guy's better than that guy, or this woman's better than that one. Clearly, that is going to be driving, even though it's for literary achievement and not for, ultimately, you don't have the onus isn't on you to declare this writer the best writer. But clearly, you're arguing for people who are better than others in your estimation, aren't you?
I never felt that way. The reason I wanted Philip Roth to win, and I did passionately, is because if you look at his achievement over a period of 52 years of writing novels, he starts in 1959 writing Goodbye Columbus, the lead story of which is absolutely magisterial. Saul Bellows says, oh my God, this guy has come fully formed into the world. Wins the National Book Award in 1960, masterpiece of a story. 51 years later, he publishes Nemesis, which is, for those of you who don't know it, published in 2010, about the polio epidemic in Newark in the 1940s. Wonderful, masterful, makes you cry, fabulous book. I can't think of anybody who sustains an achievement over that period of time. Second thing that Philip Roth does, and really it's the contour of the career that fascinates me, is novelist careers tend to go like this. That is to say, somewhere in middle age, the deep seam of material has been mined, and you go on being a novelist, but somehow it goes downwards a bit. Most novelists decline in middle or late middle age. In late middle age, in his 60s, Philip Roth all of a sudden is writing masterpiece after masterpiece. Starts with The Counterlife in 87, then you get The Human Stain, The Plot Against America, all of those books. And there's one after another. They win the National Book Award, they win the Pulitzer Prize, they win the PEN/Faulkner Award, one thing and another. Am I talking about Philip Roth at this point comparatively with against other people and making the case that book for book he's better? I'm just talking about Philip Roth, and I'm looking at that achievement, and I say, I'm really, really thrilled to be involved in a process in which one could honor that. Right? Will Rohinton Mistry eventually be comparable as a writer to Philip Roth, or Sue Tong, who's a terrific writer?
Both on the list.
Both on our list of finalists, and both in their middle years, and I hope one day will win this award. I admire them gigantically. But Philip Roth is 78 years old now, and one of the things I also thought, and it's a sentimental thought, and I wasn't supposed to think it, and I was told don't think that thought, is how many chances are we going to get to say yes to Philip Roth? Because a lot of our other writers are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Please God, their day may come. And there was a sense for me that it was appropriate at this time. That's the Thomas Hardy argument against Joyce.
Against young James Joyce.
Except Marcel Proust is known to be in his deathbed finishing the book. Proust, you know, on his deathbed, 2 days before he dies and the day before he dies is revising the proofs of the final novel, and he's rewriting the deathbed scene because he hadn't previously known what it was like to be on a deathbed. Now that's what you call a writer.
Fantastic. Now look, this is a tribute to Philip Roth. We'll move on from the controversy But I've got one final question, and then we've got an extraordinary thing that we're doing here for you today. We're going to have a taped interview, taped just a few days ago, of Philip Roth upon hearing the news that he won the Man Booker International Prize. And it's a tape that, from what I understand, gives us a perhaps unprecedented author retrospectively looking at his career. So it's a very special thing. It's an interview with Benjamin Taylor, but before we do that, I do want to just get this kind of primary question out to you, despite the controversy, despite whether it's best or for literary achievement or what's driving your final decision. How on earth do you take every writer in the world, every writer of fiction in the world, how do you winnow through that? You said it was an 18-month process, but how many books did you read? I mean, how did you even begin to narrow down the world's writers to one, Philip Roth?
When the administrator of the Man Booker got in touch with me and said, would I chair this, which was January 2010, I had two responses, one quickly upon another. First thing, I was thrilled and honored to do it. And then I had such an anxiety attack. And I felt like, you know, Clive James used to have those TV programs that were from Japan in which they humiliated the contestants. I thought, you know, this could be seriously, what marvelous novels are coming out of Hungary at the moment? Who's a major Ukrainian writer? What do you think of Lebanese fiction? Who's a good Chinese novelist? And the answer would have been no to all of the above. Now, one of the fascinations about doing this is I could answer all of those questions. I won't now, but it's been a tremendous education. You start with everybody, and you have to winnow it down to a list of finalists, which is like 12 or 15. I would have said we probably considered 200 to 250 novelists. And how do you do that? Well, you have the file of names that the previous panels have considered, so that's helpful. And then what you do in all conscience, if you have any sense or humility, is you get on the telephone and you start calling friends who are smart and help. So Carmen rang Tariq Ali, for instance, who's very good on his part of the world fiction. She rang Liz Calder, who's wonderful. She rang Deborah Rogers. I rang my agent, Peter Strauss, and the young novelist Adam Thirlwell, who's wonderful on European literature. Justin talked to David Mitchell, who's a friend of his and is very good on Asian writing. Who's
also here at Sydney Writers Festival.
Who's also here and who's absolutely marvelous writer, very bright and funny. And then I talked to various professors of comparative literature and said, help me out on this and that. Then you get the list. And then, frankly, you just start to read and read and read. But I said from the beginning, okay, two criteria. If they're not met, put the book down and move on. One, are we in the presence palpably of a great writer? Two, with regard to this great writer, are there some books which are of enduring quality which will still be read in 20 years' time? If the answer to that is yes, let's all read that writer. It's not up to any one of us. If we still think they're good, let's read 2 or 3 or 4 of them. Gosh, that's a really, really hard take, and you keep changing your opinions. And we were lucky because we all live in London. So once a month we ate together and dined and ate and argued and ate some more and argued a lot more. And it's a hard process, and you're constantly participating in the death throes of your best friends, right? I had novelists who I was longing to be on the list. Yeah. And I lost them somewhere along the way. Justin would turn against them, or Carmen would turn against them, and I would turn against Justin and Carmen, and they would turn against me. And it's fabulously exciting and very fraught. And it was very, very interesting. When I first started the process, I said, look, will you guys give me your top 10 novelists in English, just so we know where we are to start? And I have to be a little bit discreet here, but there was only one name on all 3 of the lists. And that name is a writer who I admire gigantically. The one person we agreed on at the beginning didn't make the list of finalists. So it's terribly fluid. So
there's something that happened in that process of discussion and eating, and discussion and eating where this one you had all agreed on in the beginning fell off.
Well, what happens is you start reading Chinese and Hungarians and Lebanese and all kinds of, and all of a sudden it contextualizes reading in English. And the problem is that we people who read in English are very provincial. Only 3% of the books of fiction published in English are in translation. In Italy, the figure is 26%. And consequently, we're not really fit to make really good judgments about foreign writers. And in fact, I'm sure we missed people who are very, very good young writers who haven't been translated yet. There's no way around that. And all you do is you keep coming down and down and down and down like this. Finally, we got down to about 20 names. And I wanted a shorter short list than usual. Usually it's about 15 or 16. I thought that's unmemorable, so we got down to 12 or 13. And the key was, at the point at which we got to 12 or 13, we had to agree that was the right list, and we all did. And then you hit the next problem, which is, out of those 13, probably half are potential winners. Half are there because we want to honor them to that extent. Right? And then that's enough. And then you know what happened. I mean, what happened is what always happens with literary prizes, is we argued and we disagreed.
It's a fascinating look at it, and what a gracious man he is. I mean, Roth has this great reputation for being cantankerous and prickly, and I thought what he was saying about Updike in particular there was
I found that the best 3 or 4 sentences. I thought they were fabulous, that stuff about Updike.
Yeah.
Just wonderful.
Brilliant. Look, we've got about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to, if we could bring the house lights up a bit. If you have any questions for Rick about Philip Roth or about the judging process, about Man Booker International, please, we've got microphones on either side. We have got a microphone over there and a microphone over there near the doors. So if you could make your way to the microphone very quickly to ask a question. We've got a couple of people coming up, so we'll... It's also very interesting what he was saying about of his influences, of his Bellow, Malamud, Kafka. Oh, sorry, well, could somebody help assist? If you maybe just speak into it, it'll catch your voice.
This one?
Yeah, just speak.
Rick, you did say you're not interested in looking at who is the best writer, but on the other hand, you mentioned that every writer you considered was a great writer. Did the panel of judges have some criteria for what would constitute great writing?
I'm very suspicious of such things, in the same way I'd be suspicious of criteria for what counted as a horse. If you want to know what counts as a horse, go to a paddock and you point one out, and then you know what a horse is. If you want to know what great writing is, when you encounter it, you say that's great writing. I don't have any criteria for what counts as a masterpiece, but if I read Gulliver's Travels or A la Recherche du Temps Perdu or Ulysses or War and Peace, it's obvious to me that I'm in the presence of greatness. I think you do much better in literary study. I think you do much better in life if you operate from specificity and particularity than from general principles. General principles, I think, tend to blind you. And in any case, where do general principles come from? They only come from specificity and particularity. So I could say, okay, I've now read Ulysses, Nostromo, Great Expectations, War and Peace, and Crime and Punishment. They're all palpably masterpieces. In the same way those things are palpably horses. What, therefore, do they all have in common such that they're masterpieces? And as you begin to ask that question, you get more and more abstract, you lose that capacity to keep your finger on the page, you lose your own center of feeling about the book. This is what philosophers call ostensive definitions. That is, you don't start out with necessary and sufficient criteria. What you do is you point your finger at things. And that's my feeling, and I think we would largely agree on what counts as great writers, because we would point to them.
Thank you. Rick, you've mentioned a lot of works by male writers, and I totally, am very happy about your choice of Roth. But I was wondering if you could share with us some of the great women writers who might have made, or just one or two of the great women writers that made either the long or the short list.
There were 4 women writers on the list of finalists. Dacia Mareni, who's a wonderful Italian novelist who I recommend to you very much. Marilyn Robinson. And Marilyn Robinson, American novelist, Home, Housekeeping, Gilead, was a kind of test case, and I was rather resistant to her being on it on the grounds that she'd only written 3 novels. On the other hand, you have the achievement in fiction business. They're only 3 novels, but they're fabulous. Every one of them is, you know, a magnificent example of how to write a novel. So Carmen and Justin said, come on, give a little on this one. So I said, happy to, that works for me. There's also Anne Tyler on the list, and the 4th woman was Wang Ani from China, whose Song of Everlasting Sorrows, an absolutely wonderful, kind of almost Madame Bovary-ish sort of book. The one I was most knocked out by is somebody who's often underestimated, I think, and thought of as kind of slightly popular, and that was Anne Tyler. And at one point 2 months ago, when I was reading for the final decision-making, I made what is in general the great mistake of reading one after another, and in 10 days I read 10 Anne Tyler novels. Now, if you do that with Philip Roth, and I did, I ended up with a case of very severe indigestion with Philip Roth. I think you have to space Philip Roth out a little bit, otherwise you feel sort of battered. But Anne Tyler never writes a bad novel. She never writes a bad paragraph. There's always something to admire, some aperçu, some bit of a kind of attentiveness, which is so benign and so shrewd that it is actually like a form of love. And I'm an enormous admirer of hers, and she's one of the number of people on that list that I would have been perfectly happy to see win, but only one can win.
Are there any other questions? If you can make it so quickly, we probably have time for maybe 1, maybe 2 more. Just if you want to.
Hi, Grant.
Morning, Rick. Philip Roth very generously said there that if John Updike was still alive today, he'd be sitting here instead of me. Could you comment on that?
I think it would be fair to say that Justin and Carmen and I are all enormous admirers of John Updike. I think the great post-war American novel, without any question, is the final Rabbit novel, Rabbit at Rest, which is palpable, magisterial, gorgeous book. And he's very different than Philip Roth. In Philip Roth, you get very little description of things. His world is curiously unpeopled by objects. It's thought. In Rabbit at Rest, there's this 3-page description of eating a macadamia nut. And I had to go out and buy a whole packet of them because they were so delicious.
That's product placement.
And it didn't say at the back, this is brought to you by Jones's Macadamia Nuts. I think his description of Updike, it moves me and convinces me and almost brings me to tears, is he can do anything with a sentence. And there are very few great writers of whom you could say that. It's such a generous thing to say and so shrewd. Would John have won if he'd been alive? I don't know. I mean, how do you ever know how these things work? But he is certainly somebody that all 3 of us agreed was a towering figure.
One more if it's a quick question. Did somebody else have a question? If not, we can wrap.
Rick, you said that there was 2 criteria you had to begin with about. One was it's a great writer, and B, will it last 20 years? Now, Carmen Killua clearly doesn't believe that Roth is a great writer, and I know here in Sydney at Glee Books he's been heavily remaindered in massive numbers for about the last of his 6 books. Can you give some of the arguments that were used, pro or con, and whether it was the man or the woman who was saying it?
I think Carmen's feeling is that he does go on and on and on. She seems to believe that all the books are about the same thing, which surprises me. The last few books, I wasn't that mad about Every Man, and Indignation was all right, but I think Nemesis is just startlingly brilliant, to just a total return to masterful form. I think people always say, well, this is all subjective, isn't it? And I hate that argument, because saying it's all subjective is a way of saying it's merely subjective. That is, it's only a matter of taste. Well, whether you like mushrooms or spinach is a matter of taste. I couldn't argue you out of that. But whether you admire Philip Roth and think he's a great writer doesn't seem to me merely a matter of taste. It's a matter of sitting down with the text and pointing to things and saying, tell me why this works, tell me if this doesn't work, etc. If it was merely a matter of taste and one choice was as good as another, we could be here celebrating the works of Jeffrey Archer.
With that, I'm going to have to bring this to a close. Here I am, the artistic director, and I'm breaking all the rules, keeping you here. But please, first of all, I would like to pay great thanks to Man Booker International for choosing Sydney Writers Festival to make this announcement of the Man Booker International Prize. Bravo to NBI. And I want to thank Rick Gekoski. Rick, as I said at the beginning, is an author, and he's would be available to sign books in the Ruth Cracknell room, and books are for sale in the foyer. And that's a great opportunity if you have any other questions or any comments about the prize to have a small chat with Rick if he's willing.
Delighted.
And so all that's left for me is to ask you to join me in thanking Rick and thanking the makers of this tape that we were privileged to see today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.